Glamour is a mask. It's a carefully constructed illusion of perfection, of effortless beauty, of a life untouched by the messy realities of the world. For 1 year, Isabella Sterling was the living embodiment of that illusion. As Miss Golden State, her smile could light up a room, and her grace captivated a nation. But beneath the satin sash and the diamond crown was a young woman fighting a silent war. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on the polished world of beauty pageants to tell the story of Isabella's last day. It ended with her lifeless body floating in the crystalline waters of her own swimming pool. The glamour washed away to reveal a dark and devastating secret. We've pieced together the final hours, the hidden motives, and the shocking truth of who wanted the beauty queen dead. Before we dive into the deep end of this mystery, please show your support by subscribing to our channel and clicking the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single clue in this tragic investigation. The scream was the first thing to shatter the illusion. It was a high, ragged sound that tore through the pre-dawn stillness of the Sterling mansion, a sound that didn't belong in a world of manicured lawns and hushed, old money. It came from the housekeeper, a woman who had, for 20 years, only ever moved through the house with a whisper-quiet efficiency. Detective Miles Corbin arrived 20 minutes later to a scene of jarring contradictions. The house itself was a monument to flawless taste, a sprawling Mediterranean-style villa where every cushion was plumped, every surface gleamed. The lingering scent of champagne and expensive perfume hung in the air, the ghost of the victory party that had raged there only hours before. But outside, by the infinity pool that reflected the bruised purple of the early morning sky, the perfection had been broken. Isabella Sterling, Miss Golden State, floated in the deep end. She was wearing the gossamer thin, silver-beaded gown she had been photographed in just last night. The dress fanned out around her like a ghostly shroud, the sequins catching the first rays of sun and throwing them back like cold, indifferent stars. Her famous blonde hair, usually a perfect cascade of controlled waves, was a tangled halo in the water. Her face, tilted up towards the sky, was serene, her lips slightly parted. She looked like a tragic Shakespearean heroine, like Ophelia surrounded by chlorine instead of flowers. She was, even in death, breathtakingly beautiful. And that, Corbin thought with a familiar weariness, was always the first complication. He stood by the edge of the pool, the flashing lights of the patrol cars painting garish, frantic strokes across the placid scene. His partner, a young, eager detective named Jess Tanaka, was already directing the forensics team. No obvious signs of a struggle on the surrounding deck, Tanaka reported, her voice clipped and professional. One overturned champagne flute, but that could be from the party. The ME will have to tell us more, but from here, it looks like she just fell in. Corbin didn't answer. He had seen too many scenes like this. The beautiful woman, the luxurious setting, the simple explanation. It was almost never simple. He looked at the constellation of people huddled on the veranda, wrapped in blankets and shock. They were the key players in Isabella's final act, and his primary pool of suspects. At the center was Diana Sterling, Isabella's mother. She was a woman of terrifying composure, her grief as perfectly managed as her tailored silk robe. She was the architect of Isabella's success, a legendary pageant mom who had molded her daughter from a pretty child into a national icon. Her face was a mask of tragedy, but her eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed nothing. They followed Corbin's every move. Standing a little apart was Julian Thorne, the boyfriend. He was exactly what you'd expect. Devastatingly handsome, with the easy confidence of old money. He looked genuinely shattered, his head in his hands, his expensive suit rumpled from a sleepless night. He was the other half of the golden couple, their love story splashed across a dozen magazines. And then there was Vanessa Croft, the runner-up, the eternal bridesmaid to Isabella's bride. She had been at the party, a mandatory show of good sportsmanship. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression a strange mixture of shock and something else, something harder to read. Her perfectly sculpted face was a canvas of ambition and resentment. Her mother said she came out for a swim after the party, Tanaka continued, pulling Corbin from his thoughts. said it was something she did to unwind. The party wound down around 2 a.m. The housekeeper found her at 5:15. 3-hour window, Corbin muttered, his eyes still on the people on the veranda. And everyone who was anyone was here last night. He walked over to the huddled group, his presence casting a pall over their shared shock. He started with Diana. Mrs. Sterling, I'm Detective Corbin. I am so sorry for your loss. Can you tell me about last night? Diana's voice was a low, controlled whisper. It was a celebration. Izzy's victory. It was the culmination of her entire life's work. She was radiant. Everyone was so happy for her. And after the guests left, she was electric, too wound up to sleep. She said she was going for a swim to clear her head. I told her to be careful. I went up to bed. That was the last time I saw her. Her composure cracked for a moment, a single perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek before she quickly wiped it away. Corbin then moved to Julian. Mr. Thorne, you and Isabella were together last night. Of course, Julian said, his voice thick. We were inseparable. We were talking about our future, a house, a family, everything. He looked out at the pool, his eyes welling up. She was the happiest I'd ever seen her. I don't understand how this could happen. She was a strong swimmer. Did you see her go to the pool? No. I went to my car to get something, a gift for her. By the time I came back, her mother said she'd gone for a swim and then to bed. I didn't want to wake her, so I left. A gift he never gave. A good night he never said. It was all a little too neat. Finally, he approached Vanessa Croft. Her eyes were cold and direct. It's a tragedy, she said, before he could even ask a question. Her voice was flat. You and Isabella were competitors, Corbin stated simply. We were, she said, a bitter edge to her voice. And she was the best. No one could deny that. She had a glow. Some people are just born with it. Were you friends? A short, sharp, humorless laugh escaped her lips. In pageants? There are no friends, detective. Only allies of convenience. We were civil. But I didn't kill her for a crown, if that's what you're thinking. I'm ambitious, not stupid. Corbin walked back to the edge of the pool. The forensics team was preparing to move the body. As they gently lifted Isabella from the water, something slipped from the folds of her silver gown and drifted slowly to the bottom of the pool. It was a small gold locket. It was simple, inexpensive, and completely at odds with the diamond earrings she was still wearing. It didn't belong in her world of curated glamour. Tanaka directed an officer to retrieve it. As Isabella's body, now shrouded in a sterile white bag, was wheeled away, Corbin stared at the locket, now sitting in an evidence bag. It was the first thread, the first tiny, out-of-place detail in a portrait of perfect, tragic stillness. He knew that if he pulled on it, this beautiful, flawless illusion would begin to unravel. The dark secret was there, just beneath the shimmering surface. The Sterling mansion, which had been the scene of a glittering party just a day before, was now a tomb. A heavy, unnatural silence had fallen over the house, a silence punctuated by the hushed, clinical movements of the forensics team and the occasional, muffled sob from an unseen room. Detective Corbin moved through this silent world like a ghost, his presence a constant, uncomfortable reminder that the tragedy was now an investigation. His job was to find the cracks in the polished, perfect facade of Isabella Sterling's life. His first formal interview was with Diana Sterling, conducted in the mansion's immaculate, sun-drenched library. Diana was no longer the shocked, grieving mother from the poolside. She was composed, elegant in a black silk dress, and ready for battle. She had her lawyer with her. Corbin knew this would be a carefully managed performance. My daughter was a perfect girl, detective, she began, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was disciplined, focused, and deeply kind. She worked tirelessly for that crown. It was her dream. Whose dream, Mrs. Sterling? Corbin asked, his voice gentle but firm. Hers or yours? The lawyer cleared his throat, but Diana waved him into silence. It was our dream, she said, her voice turning to steel. A shared ambition. I guided her. I molded her. I gave her the tools she needed to succeed in a very difficult world. Is that a crime? Did she ever resent that guidance? Corbin pressed. Isabella understood the sacrifices required for greatness, Diana replied, deftly avoiding the question. She was not a normal girl. She was special. And special girls have special responsibilities. Corbin shifted tactics. Tell me about her diet, her health. Her body was an instrument, Diana said, her tone clinical. It required precise tuning. She followed a very strict nutritional and exercise regimen. Her health was flawless. We found a prescription for an anti-anxiety medication in her bathroom. Filled 2 weeks ago, Corbin stated flatly. A barely perceptible flicker of annoyance crossed Diana's face. The pressure of the competition can be immense. A mild sedative to help her sleep is hardly a scandal, detective. And the locket we found in the pool? Corbin asked, placing the small, bagged object on the polished table between them. It doesn't seem to match the rest of her jewelry. Diana stared at the locket as if it were a snake. I have no idea, she said, her voice cold. I've never seen it before in my life. It must have been a gift from some secret admirer. Izzy had many. She was lying. Corbin could see it in the tightening of her jaw, the way her eyes darted away from the object. Next was Julian Thorne, interviewed at his family's palatial estate across town. His grief seemed genuine, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. She was everything to me, he said, his voice cracking. She was, that's the only word for it. She made everything better. But was everything perfect, Mr. Thorne? Corbin asked. Relationships at that level of public scrutiny. It puts a lot of pressure on a couple. We were solid, Julian insisted. We were planning our future. I was going to propose after she won the national title. So you never argued? Julian hesitated. All couples have disagreements. Izzy. She was under so much pressure from her mother, from the pageant committee. Sometimes she would get quiet, withdrawn. She had a whole world on her shoulders. I just tried to be her safe place. Did she have any other safe places? Corbin asked. Anyone else she confided in? No, Julian said, perhaps a little too quickly. It was just us. And her mother, of course. She told her mother everything. Corbin knew from his interview with Diana that this was almost certainly a lie. The final interview of the day was with Vanessa Croft, the runner-up. They met in a sterile coffee shop, a neutral territory of her choosing. She was a different person away from the glitz of the pageant world. Sharp, intelligent, and brutally honest. You want to know about the real Izzy Sterling? She said, stirring her black coffee. There were two of them. There was the Miss Golden State Izzy, the one everyone saw. The perfect, smiling robot Diana built from scratch. She was flawless, and I hated her for it. And the other Izzy? Corbin prompted. Vanessa's expression softened for the first time. The other Izzy. She was something else. She was smart. She was funny. And she was trapped. I'd see her sometimes, late at night, after a rehearsal. The smile would be gone, and she would just look, exhausted, like she was holding up the sky. Did you ever talk to her? About the pressure? A few times, Vanessa admitted. We had a strange kind of bond, the kind you can only have with your direct enemy. I told her I admired her for surviving Diana. She told me she admired me for having a life that was my own. She took a sip of her coffee. About a month ago, something changed. She seemed different, more determined, almost rebellious. She was meeting someone in secret. I saw her once, slipping out of a hotel downtown, looking over her shoulder like she was a spy. A man? Corbin asked. I don't know, Vanessa said, but she had a look on her face I'd never seen before. It wasn't happiness. It was purpose. She was planning something big. And I think it scared the hell out of the people who were counting on her to just keep smiling. Corbin left the coffee shop with a new, sharper picture of the victim. A girl living a double life. A girl with a secret purpose. That evening, the preliminary autopsy report came in. The cause of death was drowning, as expected. But there were other findings. The toxicology screen showed a significant amount of a powerful, fast-acting sedative in her system, a dose far higher than what would be prescribed for simple anxiety. It would have left her disoriented, her muscles weak. And there were faint, fingerprint-shaped bruises on her upper arms, as if she had been gripped tightly, and perhaps guided towards the pool's edge. This was no accident. This was murder. Corbin stood in his office late that night, the lights of the city spread out below him. He looked at the evidence board. The smiling, perfect face of Isabella Sterling stared back at him. A girl with a controlling mother, a perfect boyfriend, a jealous rival, and a secret life. Any one of them could have wanted her dead. But the sedative, the bruises, that spoke of a colder, more methodical kind of killer. He looked down at the locket on his desk. He carefully pried it open. It wasn't a picture of her parents or of Julian. It was a tiny, folded piece of paper. He unfolded it with a pair of tweezers. On it was a single word, written in a small, neat hand, Haven. It wasn't a name. It wasn't a place he recognized. But he knew with a sudden, chilling certainty that it was the key. It was the name of her secret. And whatever it was, it had gotten her killed. Haven. The word was a ghost, a meaningless fragment that whispered of a significance Corbin couldn't yet grasp. It wasn't a lead. It was an echo. For days, he and Tanaka ran it through every database they had. It wasn't a street name in Isabella's life, not a boat, not a childhood pet, not a brand. It was a dead end, a piece of a puzzle with no corresponding parts. The investigation stalled, caught in the gravitational pull of the three main suspects, each with a plausible motive and a carefully constructed alibi for the exact time of death. Frustrated, Corbin decided to go back to the source, to the silent witness of Isabella's life, her bedroom. He obtained a new, more specific warrant, allowing him to search not just for evidence of a crime, but for evidence of a life. He needed to find the real Isabella, the one who had hidden a secret in a locket. Her room was as immaculate and impersonal as a luxury hotel suite. The color palette was a soft, inoffensive blend of cream and rose gold. The books on her shelf were mostly coffee table editions on art and fashion. Her closet was a museum of couture, each outfit perfectly spaced and color-coordinated. It was the room of a brand, not a person. Diana's touch was everywhere, but Corbin was looking for what didn't belong. He was looking for the cracks. He and Tanaka spent hours searching, their methodical process a stark contrast to the room's serene beauty. They checked under the mattress, behind the paintings, in the linings of her expensive handbags. Nothing. It was Tanaka who found it. "Miles," she called from the walk-in closet. "You should see this." In the back of the closet, behind a row of perfectly stored pageant gowns, was a small, unassuming cedar chest. It was the only piece of furniture in the entire room that wasn't modern and sleek. It was old, a little scuffed, a piece of a different life. It was locked. They pried it open. Inside, it was like opening a time capsule to a different person. There were no trophies or sashes. There were stacks of worn paperback novels, books by Plath and Didion and Atwood. There were journals filled with a messy, passionate scrawl that was nothing like the perfect, looping signature she used for autographs. There was a box of old oil paints and a stack of small, raw canvases. And in the very bottom, tucked beneath a faded college sweatshirt, was a second phone. A cheap, prepaid burner phone. This was it. This was the real Isabella. They took the chest back to the precinct. While the tech team worked on the phone, Corbin began to read the journals. It was like listening to a confession. Page after page, Isabella's voice emerged. Not the polished, media-trained automaton, but a smart, angry, and deeply wounded young woman. She wrote of her mother's relentless ambition, of a childhood lost to endless rehearsals and calorie counting. "I am not a person," one entry read. "I am a project. My body, my face, my smile. They are not mine. They are assets in Sterling Enterprises, and my mother is the CEO." She wrote of her eating disorder, a desperate bid for control in a life where she had none. She wrote of her profound loneliness, of the hollow emptiness behind the glittering facade of her life with Julian. "He loves Miss Golden State," she wrote. "I'm not sure he's ever actually met Isabella." And then, about 6 months ago, the tone of the journals began to change. The despair was still there, but it was now tempered with a new, steely resolve. It started with a description of a younger contestant, a 14-year-old girl, who had had a breakdown backstage after a brutal weigh-in session with her coach. Isabella had comforted her, and in that moment, something had shifted. "I looked at her and I saw myself," she wrote, "and I realized I had a choice. I could be a cautionary tale or I could be a lifeboat." This was the beginning of Haven. The journals, combined with the messages from the burner phone, painted a shocking, secret picture. Haven wasn't a place. It was a network, an underground railroad for pageant girls. Using her platform, her access, and the prize money she secretly siphoned away, Isabella had created a clandestine organization. She would identify girls who were in abusive or exploitative situations, girls suffering from eating disorders, financial exploitation by their families, or pressure from predatory coaches and judges. She would make secret contact. She would arrange for their escape, providing them with money, a safe place to stay, and access to therapy and legal aid. She was a quiet, anonymous revolutionary, using the system that was destroying her to save others from the same fate. The burner phone was a log of her secret work. There were dozens of coded conversations with other girls, a network of former contestants who were helping her. There were messages to a pro bono lawyer, and there were messages to a journalist, a well-known investigative reporter named David Chun. Isabella had been feeding him information for a major exposé on the dark, corrupt underbelly of the pageant industry. She was his anonymous source, providing him with names, dates, and evidence of financial corruption, abuse, and cover-ups. Her final message to the journalist had been sent on the day of her victory. "I won," it said. "Now I have the platform, the real one. They can't ignore me now. I'm ready to go on the record. I have the final piece of evidence. Meet me tomorrow. This is going to bring him down." The him she was referring to was a name that appeared again and again in her journals, a name spoken of with a mixture of fear and loathing: Marcus Thorne, Julian's father. Marcus Thorne was not just a wealthy benefactor of the pageant system. He was its king. As the head of the Thorne Corporation, the primary sponsor of the Miss Golden State and Miss America pageants, he held the power of a feudal lord. He controlled the judges, the contracts, the television rights. The journals described him as a brilliant, charming, and utterly ruthless man who treated the contestants not as people, but as investments. He was the puppet master, and everyone, including Diana Sterling and the judges, danced on his strings. The final journal entry was written just hours before the party. "Marcus knows," it read. "I don't know how, but he knows I'm the one talking to the press. He cornered me after the rehearsal today. He didn't threaten me. He was worse. He was calm. He smiled and told me how proud he was, but his eyes, they were like chips of ice. He said, 'Some investments are too valuable to be liquidated, Isabella. Don't forget that.' It was a warning, but I'm not scared anymore. He's built an empire on the broken bodies and broken dreams of girls like me. Tonight, I smile and wear the crown. Tomorrow, I burn his kingdom to the ground." Corbin sat back, the journal open in his hands. The pieces of the puzzle were no longer scattered. They were coming together into a single, terrifying image. He finally understood the dark secret beneath the glamour. Isabella Sterling wasn't just a beauty queen. She was a whistleblower, and she had been silenced on the eve of her greatest victory, not by a jealous rival or a controlling mother, but by the king whose throne she was about to destroy. He now had the motive. He had the timeline, but he still had to prove it. Armed with the devastating truth from Isabella's journals, Detective Corbin's investigation shifted from a domestic whodunit to a conspiracy. Marcus Thorne was the target, a man insulated by layers of wealth, power, and plausible deniability. Corbin knew a direct assault would be useless. Thorne's lawyers would stonewall him into oblivion. He had to dismantle the king's castle from the outside in, using the people Thorne considered his pawns. His first move was to re-interview Diana Sterling. This time, he didn't ask about her daughter's dreams. He asked about her daughter's business. He laid out a copy of a page from Isabella's journal on the library table. A page that detailed how Diana had been pressured by Marcus Thorne to sign an exploitative, multi-year contract on Isabella's behalf. "Your daughter was about to void that contract, Mrs. Sterling," Corbin said, his voice quiet. "She was going to expose Marcus Thorne for financial misconduct. She believed he was skimming profits from the contestants' appearance fees. She had the paperwork to prove it." Diana's composure, for the first time, completely shattered. The mask of the grieving mother fell away, revealing a face of raw, cornered fear. "She was a fool," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "A sentimental, reckless fool. I built an empire for her. I dedicated my life to making her a star. And she was going to throw it all away. For what? For a principle? For a few pathetic, weak little girls who didn't have what it takes to succeed. So you knew what she was planning?" Corbin pressed. "I knew she was being difficult," Diana admitted, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. "Marcus called me the day of the pageant. He was furious. He said Isabella had become a liability. He told me to handle my asset, to control her. And did you?" "I tried," she cried, her voice rising. "I begged her to stop. I told her she was playing with fire, that she didn't understand the kind of man Marcus Thorne was. We had a terrible fight right before the party. She told me she was done being my project. She told me she was finally going to be her own person." Her face crumpled. "I didn't want her dead, detective. I just wanted her to win. I just wanted her to be safe." She had provided the confirmation. Thorne knew. And he had tried to use Diana as his instrument. Next was Julian. Corbin found him at his downtown office, a picture of a young man trying to drown his grief in work. Corbin didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know about your father's business practices, Julian," he said. "And I know that Isabella was about to expose him. I need to know what you saw the night she died." Julian's handsome face went pale. He stood up and walked to the window, his back to Corbin. "My father is a powerful man, detective. You don't understand. I understand that the woman you claim to love was murdered to protect his secrets," Corbin said, his voice hard. "The question is, were you a part of it?" Julian spun around, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and anger. "No, I loved her. I would have done anything for her." "Then tell me what happened at that party." Julian finally broke. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "I saw them," he said, his voice muffled. "My father and Izzy. They were in the garden, away from the music. I thought he was congratulating her. But they were arguing." His face. I've never seen him look like that. It was pure, cold rage. She wasn't backing down. She told him it was over, that she was going to tell the world the truth. He grabbed her arm. "Did you hear what he said?" Julian looked up. His eyes filled with a terrible, dawning shame. He said, "You're a beautiful, expensive product, Isabella, and I have a zero-tolerance policy for product recalls." Then he saw me watching, and his face went smooth again. He smiled and walked away. Izzy was shaken. That's when I went to get the gift from my car. I was going to ask her to leave with me, to just run away from all of it. But when I came back, his voice trailed off. He had provided the eyewitness account of the threat. Corbin now had motive and opportunity. But he knew it wasn't Marcus Thorne who had held Isabella's arms and guided her into the pool. A king doesn't bloody his own hands. He needed to find the knight who had made the final, deadly move. His investigation led him to Thorne's head of security, a man named Frank Miller. Miller was an ex-cop with a gambling problem, a fact Corbin discovered after a deep dive into his financials. He was a man who could be bought. Corbin and Tanaka pulled Miller in for questioning. At first, Miller was a stone wall, denying everything. But Corbin didn't ask him about murder. He asked him about his debts. He laid out bank statements showing a series of large, anonymous cash deposits into Miller's accounts, the last one made on the morning after Isabella's death. "That's a lot of money for a man on a security salary, Frank," Corbin said calmly. "Looks like you finally had a good run at the tables." Miller started to sweat. "Here's what I think happened," Corbin continued, leaning forward. "Marcus Thorne was in a bind. A very valuable asset was about to become a very public liability. He asked you to handle it, not to kill her, just to scare her. He told you to slip a little something in her drink, to talk to her, to remind her of her contractual obligations. But she wouldn't back down, and things got out of hand. It was an accident, wasn't it, Frank?" Corbin was offering him a lifeline, a way to shift the blame, to reduce murder to manslaughter. Miller looked from Corbin's face to Tanaka's, his resolve beginning to crumble. Tanaka slid a photograph across the table. It was a still from a neighbor's security camera, grainy and time-stamped at 2:45 a.m. It showed a car, identical to Miller's, parked on the street just a block away from the Sterling mansion. "You were there, Frank," she said softly. "We know you were there." That was the final blow. Frank Miller broke. He confessed everything. Thorne had ordered him to silence her. He had given him the sedative. Miller had slipped it into a glass of champagne and given it to Isabella, pretending it was from an admirer. He had followed her out to the pool. He was supposed to just intimidate her, maybe take some compromising photos to use as blackmail. But she had been groggy from the drug, and she had fought back, slapping him. He had grabbed her arms to steady her, and she had stumbled, falling backward into the pool. She had been too sedated to swim, and he had panicked and fled. It was the confession Corbin needed. He now had the entire chain of command, from the king to the pawn. He stood up, leaving Miller sobbing in the interrogation room. "Get a warrant for Marcus Thorne," he said to Tanaka, "for conspiracy to commit murder." The king's gambit had failed. It was time for checkmate. The arrest of Marcus Thorne sent an earthquake through the glittering world he had so carefully constructed. It was the lead story on every news channel, a spectacular fall from grace that captivated the public. The king was dragged from his corporate castle not in handcuffs. His lawyers had arranged a quiet surrender, but he was a king nonetheless dethroned. His empire of glamour revealed to be a house of corruption and murder. The trial was a media circus. Marcus Thorne, ever the master of appearances, sat at the defense table looking cool, confident, and utterly untouchable. His high-priced legal team worked tirelessly to discredit the witnesses. They painted Frank Miller as a desperate gambling addict who had acted alone, a rogue employee whose tragic, accidental actions had been twisted by the prosecution. They painted Julian as a weak, grieving young man who had been manipulated by a relentless detective. And they painted Isabella as an unstable, ungrateful girl who had cracked under the pressure of her own success. But they couldn't discredit the journals. They couldn't discredit the burner phone. In the end, it was Isabella's own voice, read aloud in the silent courtroom, that condemned her killer. Her words, full of pain and purpose, told a story so compelling and so tragic that it cut through all the legal maneuvering. She was not just a body in a pool. She was a witness testifying from beyond the grave. Frank Miller, in exchange for a lesser charge of manslaughter, testified against his former boss. Julian took the stand and, his voice trembling but firm, told the world what he had seen and heard, choosing the memory of the woman he loved over the father he had always feared. The final, devastating blow came from Diana Sterling. On the stand, her perfect composure finally and completely gone, she looked at Marcus Thorne and spoke the truth. She told the jury how Thorne had controlled them, how he had threatened her, how he had referred to her daughter as an asset. In a moment of raw, broken humanity, she admitted her own complicity, her own role in pushing her daughter to the brink. "I wanted her to be a queen," she sobbed, "but all he ever saw her as was a pawn. And when the pawn decided to cross the board on her own, he took her out of the game." The jury found Marcus Thorne guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison. The king had been checkmated. In the aftermath, the world Isabella had fought against began to crumble. The journalist she had been working with, David Chun, published his exposé, using her journals and the evidence unearthed during the trial. The article, titled The Haven Project, was a bombshell. It led to federal investigations, to sponsors pulling their funding, and to the complete restructuring of the national pageant organization. One by one, the corrupt judges and abusive coaches that Isabella had identified were removed. Her secret war, in the end, had been won. The lives of those she left behind were forever changed. Diana Sterling sold the mansion and disappeared from the public eye, a broken woman who had lost everything in her pursuit of a crown for her daughter. Julian Thorne took over his father's company, but with a new purpose. He established the Isabella Sterling Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing mental health and legal support for young women in high-pressure performance industries, effectively institutionalizing the Haven network his lost love had created. Vanessa Croft, the runner-up, was offered the Miss Golden State crown. She turned it down. In a public statement, she said that the crown was tainted by tragedy and that she would not wear it. Instead, she became a vocal advocate for reform, working closely with Julian's foundation, honoring her former rival in a way she never could have in life. The feud was over. A respectful alliance had taken its place. Months after the trial, Detective Corbin found himself driving past the Sterling mansion. A large for sale sign was staked into the immaculate lawn. The house was dark and empty, its windows like vacant eyes. He pulled over and got out of his car, walking to the edge of the property, looking at the pool. It was covered now, a sheet of dark plastic pulled over its crystalline surface. He thought of Isabella, a girl who had been forced to wear a mask of glamour, but whose true beauty was in the fierce, courageous heart she had hidden from the world. She had been silenced, but her voice had, in the end, been heard. Her death had not been in vain. It had been the final, tragic, and ultimately triumphant move in her secret rebellion. The dark secret beneath the glamour had been unveiled, and in the quiet, empty space it left behind, there was, finally, a glimmer of light.